Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. From Brussels to Bucharest, farmer disputes disrupt European cities. We'll be in Paris as they bring the capital to a standstill.
All this as new GDP figures reveal gloomy economic news across much of the EU. We'll be assessing what it all means.
Red faces at the UK's largest bank. HSBC is fined $73 million for failing to protect customer deposits.
Brain power, Elon Musk says his company has successfully implanted one of its wireless chips into a human.
And all the right moves. The French breakdancer celebrating 60 years of the special relationship between China and France.
Farmers on tractors have been blockading roads across Europe in a bid to prevent food getting to supermarket shelves.
The protesters say the drastic measures are necessary because excessive regulations and new climate policies threaten their livelihoods.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Tony Waterman, at a protest on the outskirts of Paris. Tony, what are you seeing? What's going on there?
Well, Jamie, I'm here on the A1, which is normally one of the busiest roads in Europe, trucks coming and going all day long. But as you can see, there is a backup that stretches as far as the eye can see. And this backup, not just here, but backing up about 50 kilometers. And this is something that's happening across the country right now. What we're seeing, and perhaps you'll see as well, are some of these tractors starting to leave a little bit. They are heading home for the day, and other tractors that are further down in the convoy are making their way to the front of the line to make sure that that front of the line remains where it is. Some of them deciding to leave because they need to go home, they need to do work, but people generally not feeling very moved by Prime Minister Gabriel Attal's speech that took place earlier today. He made a few new concessions to these farmers, saying that there's going to be an emergency fund for wine growers who've been particularly hard by climate disasters and poor yield. That's going to be released sometime in the coming week. And he's also made other concessions last week, getting rid of a planned fuel tax increase and also promising to crack down on companies that are trying to undercut laws that are meant to protect farmers' salaries. But really, the farmers here are still very upset. They say there's a long way to go when it comes to these negotiations. 140 demands on the table. And again, not just happening here on the A1, but dozens of motorways across the country. Some of these farmers making their way towards airports, the Toulouse airport earlier today. We're not far from Charles de Gaulle right here, but that is certainly a red line for the government, making sure that the downtown area of Paris does not become blocked, and certainly not any of these main hubs of transportation.
Tony, we're watching the pictures as you're speaking. I mean, very dramatic scenes, but we should make clear these demonstrations are not confined to France. They appear to be spreading across Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. This type of protest in the last couple of weeks have been taking place in Germany, in Belgium, the Netherlands, Poland, Romania. All of those farmers obviously have their own complaints that are sometimes very specific to the countries in which they operate. But the common concern among all of these farmers are regulations, and regulations that sometimes come in that they don't understand. And these are regulations that are taking place at the EU level. A lot of them have to do with environmental standards that are going to be taking place. So, for example, one of the incoming measures is that 4% of agricultural land be farrowed for conservation purposes, a rotation of crops, limiting the amount of pesticides that are being used. And these farmers say that that is very costly, and it runs in contradiction to the push for greater food security in Europe. Another thing they're concerned about is an FTA with some South American countries, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. They say this is going to allow for cheaper imports of crops, of beef coming into the EU. because those farmers do not have to work to the same standards as the farmers here in Europe. So this is an issue that leaders are bringing to the EU. Emmanuel Macron said that he is going to bring this issue up when he is in Brussels on Thursday, and we're expecting other leaders to be having these types of conversations as well.
Tony, thank you for that. Our correspondent Tony Waterman outside Paris.
Jacques Rellon is a senior research fellow at the Global Policy Institute.
In France, the phenomenon, the unrest of farmers is widespread. We've seen problems in Germany, we've seen Holland, Belgium, even in southern countries, in Spain and Italy, there's some protests. So it is a wide-ranging protest due to the fact that farmers' incomes are not increasing, on the opposite, they are decreasing. At the same time, they have to face measures adopted by European Union in order to fight climate change, which they think are going against their own practices and making their job even more difficult and less, especially regarding the issue of pesticides. And also, farmers are very upset with the idea of free trade agreements with some regions where their imports will be far more competitive than the products made in Europe. In the European Union, costs are high, especially in a country like France. Wage costs and social security costs are very high compared to other parts of the European Union, such as Eastern countries, and even more so compared to countries such as South America and New Zealand. And for example, you see one of the big concerns of farmers are these free trade agreements with regions such as South America, the Mercosur trade agreement, which would involve huge imports of beef and plants coming up, not respecting European rules.
Well, France has said that the European Commission has halted negotiations on that deal, with the free trade deal. Yeah. So what impact will that have?
It will. I mean, at the same time, these free trade agreements are beneficial to some other sectors of the industry. Europe is actually exports a lot industrial goods and so on, and this free trade agreement would be good for European industry, for example, and also for some farmers. Not all farmers are in the same situation. Wine farmers in France, for example, like free trade agreements, but sheep farmers or beef farmers won't like them. So it is very difficult to take a measure and to see what other countries will decide. At the moment, Macron is saying that. Whether he's able to stop this Mercosur trade agreement is another thing, and whether it's a good thing for Europe, that is another issue too. So you can't sacrifice everything for the benefit of a dwindling population of farmers.
There are angry farmers, though, as you've mentioned, in Belgium, in Spain, in Germany, Romania, the Netherlands. Could farming be a major European election issue?
It will be, undoubtedly, it will be, and already the election, because in this election issue, there will be the issue of environmental protection, which sometimes goes against the wishes of the farmer, and at the same time, it will be a big issue because you have a lot of populist parties, far-right parties, who have decided to take advantage of this crisis.
Well, those farmers' protests and the feeling of financial disquiet in Europe comes alongside the release of more poor economic news. While the Eurozone narrowly avoided recession, gross domestic product fell by 0.1% in the final quarter of last year. The entire euro area grew just 0.5% in 2023. Among the worst performers, Germany, once the economic powerhouse of Europe, gross domestic product there shrank by 0.3% in 2023, with falling investment in construction machinery and equipment to blame. A recession could be on the cards there in coming months, with economists expecting no growth for the start of this year. A pretty similar picture in France, the Eurozone's second largest economy. GDP there grew by 0.9% throughout 2023, but that was somewhat hampered by slow growth in the final quarter of the year. France narrowly avoided a technical recession, but many economists now expect that stagnation to persist into 2024. Well, let's talk to Vicky Price, the international economist and business consultant. Vicky, what do you make of these figures?
It's not greatly surprising, but what is surprising is that there are big differences within that overall figure. So we're talking about the European economy basically sort of flatlining at the end of 2023, but within that, yes, Germany fall in GDP in the last quarter. Yes, France, really no change in GDP then. But then you have some of the southern European countries doing considerably better, which include, of course, Spain and Italy and Portugal. And it's interesting because Spain saw an increase of 0.6% in terms of growth in GDP in the last quarter. And the previous quarter, it had seen growth of 0.4%. So there are different trends happening in different parts of the EU. And it's not hugely surprising that Germany, which has been particularly badly affected by the developments in the gas supply side and exports, of course, to China, which have suffered, is doing worse than others, whereas those that are not that dependent on China and exports more generally, or on very energy-intensive industries, which they then rely on for exports and growth, those countries have done better.
Well, let's just look at that good news. There isn't much of it to be had, but Spain, Italy and Portugal, as you say, going like the clappers compared to everybody else, relatively speaking. Why are they doing so much better?
It's really interesting because, after all you've seen is a decline in inflation happening across the EU and wages only recovering a little bit. But in those countries, it seems that confidence has come back, particularly for the household sector. Remember, those countries also have had the benefit of a very substantial increase in tourism, which took place over the last, obviously, summer, of course, post-COVID. In fact, in some countries, the numbers of tourists coming is even greater than was the case before. And they have really benefited from that increase in demand that has taken place. That has given confidence in terms of the construction sector in particular, where we've seen, Southern Europe actually finding itself once again in a sort of, quite a positive situation about house building, which is really good news for them since construction is such a large part of the economy, the property market. So they have benefited from that. So the question is how fast that can also spread across the rest of Europe, because wages are beginning to pick up across many countries. And there are some areas where you do have a bit of a real increase in wages, but it's been a lot slower getting there than, for example, in the US and, for example, also here in the UK.
I mean, let's be fair, recession in the Eurozone was narrowly avoided. I mean, that was a huge relief, wasn't it, given the persistent high inflation, the likes of which we haven't seen for decades?
Well, it's not so much the inflation, which has been coming down very, very fast anyway, frankly. So if you see, some countries over the last few months have seen deflation. So, for example, the Netherlands saw that for a bit. We've seen that also happening in Belgium. You've seen also in Spain, where you're seeing a bit of an increase now in inflation, also having inflation below 2%. What is the real problem, and has been the real problem in Europe, is the high interest rates, which for this type of inflation environment are perhaps no longer justified. So they need to come down. And I think the European Central Bank acknowledges that, more or less. It's going to look, it said, at what happens in growth in the first quarter and then rethink its policy. So the expectation now is that perhaps we're going to see a slightly faster reduction in interest rates than would otherwise be the case.
Vicky, great to see you. Thanks so much for coming on the programme again. Vicky Price, the international economist and business consultant.
Not all the economic news is gloomy. The International Monetary Fund has revised its outlook for the global economy this year. It now predicts global growth will hit 3.1% in 2024. That's slightly up from its October forecast. The marginally improved picture is due to increased fiscal support measures in China and a strong US economy. The IMF says there's now a reduced likelihood of a hard landing for the world's economy.
There's a hard landing at HSBC and some red faces at the banking giant. They've been fined $73 million by the UK regulator for serious failings in protecting consumer deposits.
It's the first penalty of its kind under British rules designed to protect customers if a bank fails. Our correspondent Siobhan McCall has been following the story. So precisely why has HSBC been fined?
Well, Juliet, HSBC failed to put in place requirements to safeguard customer deposits over many years. In the UK, there's a scheme called the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. It's a government scheme, and it protects customer deposits up to £85,000 or $107,000 in the case of a bank collapse. In the case of a bank collapse, that scheme steps in and they need to identify customers quickly so they can return their money promptly. The regulator found that HSBC did not have adequate controls in place. And in fact, in one unit, 99% of customers who were identified as not being eligible in the scheme, in fact, were. The regulator found that the breach was so serious that it gave out its second highest ever fine, and that was $73 million. But actually, it could have been a lot worse for HSBC, and that is because the original fine was closer to $122 million. But the regulator found that HSBC didn't deliberately make this mistake. It was just an error. And also, it found that HSBC it cooperated well in the investigation. So HSBC says it's pleased this historic situation is resolved and it's now focused on its customers.
Those of us who are very old, of course, remember the 2008 financial crisis when everyone said this must never happen again. Questions now being asked as to whether or not that framework, that regulatory framework that emerged from that financial crisis back in 2008 is really still fit for purpose.
Yes, Jamie, this question came up last year, and obviously with this news with HSBC, it's back again. And that is it fit for 2024, both in terms of the amount available and the quickness? And it came about, the questions last year, on the back of the Silicon Valley Bank collapse in the US, where we saw the bank collapse within 48 hours. In fact, there was a bank run with $40 billion withdrawn in just a couple of hours. And that speed is concerning. And in fact, the Bank of England has been looking into ways to bring the scheme up into a more, I suppose, fitting of a modern time. And there are two ways. Firstly, the amount in the US is $250,000 per customer. In the UK, it's only $107,000. They want to see that more on par with the US. And then again, that issue of speed. 7 days, at least 7 days here in the UK, if your bank collapses and you have to get your money back. In the US, it's the next working day. And you can imagine for businesses reliant on that money, if they've got bills to pay, loans to pay off, it's going to be really tough. But at the moment, that is just very much in the discussion stage, nothing concrete, so we'll have to wait and see what the Bank of England does decide on that in the future.
Thanks, Siobhan. Siobhan McCall.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, 2 years of political deadlock in Northern Ireland. Is that all about to change?
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. From digitising supply chains to data governance, it's all being discussed at a forum in Washington.
The EU-US Trade and Technology Council is pushing for better partnership on investment screening and export control tools. Our correspondent John Terrett is in New York. John, great to see you. Now, this sounds rather dry, yes, but it's important. Now, what tops the agenda at the US-EU Trade and Technology Council?
Yes, well, you said it, Juliet, man. You said it, not me. It is true. I hate talking about trade issues. Nobody understands them. I mean, let's be honest. Nobody understands them. Only the people whose job it is 24/7 have any idea what they're talking about most of the time. But anyway, this is going on today. And I don't know about you, but I always get the impression that the Americans rather tolerate the Europeans. They sort of go, oh, gee, you know, here they come again from the TTC. What are we going to do? We'll give them a meal. We'll show them the Jefferson, we'll show them the Lincoln, and we'll get them out of there as quickly as possible. That's my feeling. I may be wrong about that. In other words, I think it's more important from the European perspective than it is from the American perspective for these things. Now, there are two things that top the agenda this year, having said that. One is globalization, or rather, the perceived fragmentation of globalization. Now, for years, we've been told that globalization is the way forward and everything's been heading that way. And now, certainly here in America, we are certainly seeing cracks in that economic theory. The other one that tops the agenda is economic security. Now, in terms of a country, that's things like the independence of your people, their housing, their communities, their needs when it comes to sustainability. It's food, it's shelter, it's clothing, healthcare, education, jobs and social protection, all that kind of stuff. Now, the TCC really coordinates discussion between trade and technology policy between the two giant economies. They've had about 4 meetings so far. They've had limited success. They've done some work on AI, quantum computing, whatever that is, nobody really knows, and green technology. But the trade side of this is stalled. And the reason that it's stalled is Joe Biden. And it's the same thing that happened with China. You know, Biden came into power in early 2021, and everybody expected everything to change, and it did not vis-a-vis China. You know, the tariffs are still in place, the bad relationship between Beijing and Washington is in place, and it is the same with the European Union as well, because those tariffs on steel and aluminum and the ones coming the other way on motorbikes and whiskey are still there. Now, they may have been paused, but they're still there. And the reason for this is that Biden knows he has to win an election in November, and he has to be seen to be very tough among his electorate, which in many cases are the hard-scrabble people of Ohio and Pennsylvania, where they actually make the steel still. So this has come a shock to leaders around the world, including the European Union, who really weren't expecting it. And the Europeans are flying into Washington for their 2-day meeting in 2 different venues starting today. And the background to this from the European perspective, and remember the whole issue about Biden insisting on microchips being made in America, and Europe being very concerned that that will suck work away from the EU to the United States. The Europeans are very concerned that protectionism is very much on the rise, not just here but in other parts of the world. And they do speak amongst themselves and say, well, you know, America is not the same place it used to be when it comes to us having influence there. Guys?
John, if you were going to ship me a consignment of whiskey, you might be using UPS, but they've announced these 12,000 job cuts. I mean, hard days for yes, the packaging giant.
Well, UPS is a packaging giant globally and here at home in America. 12,000 jobs going. The CEO says it's a difficult and disappointing decision. He says that he's seeking to trim the budget by $1 billion a year, starting immediately. UPS stock fell by about 6% on this news. And what's happening is we are seeing layoffs in all sorts of areas in American life. Now, it started with tech last year. Now it's moving to pretty much everywhere, and logistics is just the latest area. I feel obliged to mention this. Remember, we covered this widely on our program last year. In April of last year, the Teamsters Union, very, very powerful American union, won a huge victory against UPS. Do you remember that? A huge victory. They're getting pay rises of between $2.75 and $7.50 an hour. And now, almost a year later, 12,000 job cuts. Not sure what to say about that.
Well, I know something you have got a lot to say about, because you told me yesterday you're excited about earnings season kicking off, and we've had some records with the tech companies.
I know, it's funny. So when we had the closing bell yesterday at about 4 o'clock, we were all running around going, is that a closing record? Is it? I don't know. We weren't sure. Anyway, in the end, it turns out the Dow was at a closing record the 6th time this year. The NASDAQ 100 was, not the composite, which we show you. And the S&P 500, well, that was above 49,000 for the first time ever. Another record, the 6th this year. Now, it was all based around the prospect for big corporate earnings today. We have Microsoft coming out. That'll be based around AI. And, of course, it's a $3 trillion company now, more expensive than Apple. Alphabet's coming out. That's Google. We'll have them after the closing bell. We're going to get Starbucks as well, whose growth really is concentrated in Asia and in particular in China. We've just had General Motors, shares up 7%, sales and profit up, outlook up, but EVs slipping, according to the boss. And let me just tell you now what the markets are doing. The Dow is up by 7 points. The S&P is down by 3. We just had the JOLTS report out. That's the number of job openings in America, above 9 million again. That's inflationary. The Fed watches that very closely. They won't like it. They're meeting today and tomorrow. And as you said earlier, the IMF, much brighter outlook for the world economy, 3.1%, not 2.9. With India, the star of the show this year, much greater than 6% growth. Guys?
Busy week on the New York Stock Exchange. John Cherritt in New York, thank you very much.
Now, greater support for listed companies to stabilise the country's capital market. That's the message from China's Vice Premier, He Feng. He stressed the importance of improving the performance of listed firms and restoring their investment confidence. His remarks come after recent falls in China's stock markets.
Chinese electric vehicle giant BYD says net profit in 2023 hit $4 billion, a nearly 87% jump on the previous year. The company says that's driven by rapid growth in overseas sales and cost control in the supply chain. Despite the record-breaking earnings, they missed analyst expectations. BYD shares fell 4% in Hong Kong.
Japan's Toyota has retained its title as the world's top-selling car maker for a 4th straight year, with a record 11.2 million vehicles sold in 2023. That figure is well ahead of the 2nd-place German rival Volkswagen. This comes as Toyota is facing a series of safety scandals in 3 of its subsidiaries.
Northern Ireland has had no government for 2 years, but now the Unionist Party, the DUP, has agreed to return the power-sharing administration in return for the UK government changing trading arrangements.
Well, the DUP withdrew from the power-sharing agreement with Republican rival Sinn Féin. The party has been angered by post-Brexit trade arrangements that created barriers between mainland Britain and Northern Ireland. Well, our correspondent Yolo Ap Dawid has been following the story. Even if you're Northern Irish, politics there is often baffling. What is this announcement exactly?
It's baffling for everybody, I think, in Northern Ireland as well. What's new now is that the DUP, which pulled out of Stormont, which is where the regional government in Northern Ireland sits and decides on most things in terms of locally, they actually now feel that it's pragmatic and a good time to come back and talk to UK government and to the other parties in Northern Ireland to try and re-establish the local government in Northern Ireland. Why is that important? Well, it's really important for everybody involved in terms of the 1.9 million people who live there. And also, there was a huge strike, public workers' strike, the biggest in 50 years in Northern Ireland just a few weeks ago, complaining about underinvestment, employment and pay and all the rest of it. But now, Jeffrey Donaldson, after a meeting late into the night, 130 members of the Democratic Unionist Party met and agreed, and this is what he said, why this is important now.
This package, I believe, safeguards Northern Ireland's place in the Union and will restore our place within the UK internal market. It will remove checks for goods moving within the UK and remaining in Northern Ireland, and will end Northern Ireland automatically following future EU laws.
And that's what's been not just the economic sticking point, but the political sticking point. Northern Irish Unionists say they want to be treated like any other part of the United Kingdom, that is England, Wales and Scotland. But of course what is different is that they are not part of the mainland. They are attached to the Republic of Ireland, which is still a part of the European Union, and nobody can deflect from that. There is a border, a hard border between, or a soft border, an open border between the Republic and the north of Ireland. So the response from Sinn Féin, now the largest party in Northern Ireland, obviously they're glad and they're willing to go back because they will be leading this next government. This is Mary Lou MacDonald, the president of Sinn Féin in Ireland.
There has been a great sigh of relief, but also a sense of expectation now that all of us together, for the common good, put our shoulder to the wheel and get the best job done that we possibly can for every single person living here in the north.
And that will be groundbreaking because Sinn Féin will have the first ministership in Northern Ireland. It'll be the first time ever because it's the biggest party. The other part of this is the UK government, and Chris Heaton-Harris is the Secretary of State in Westminster for the UK government. More details on what exactly has been agreed, and there'll be questions about what's different now to 2018 and the Theresa May government. But anyway, there's been 3 lost prime ministers with all this talk of Brexit.
And speaking of Brexit, I can't believe it, but it's 4 years since the UK left the European Union officially. It took a very long time to get to that point from the 2016 referendum. So talk to us about how that fits in.
It's all about the trade agreement in terms of the EU, the UK pulling out of the EU, but of course the fact that the Johnson government, the Conservative Johnson government, wanted basically a trade border in the middle of the sea, which didn't make sense to anybody. It doesn't matter how baffling the politics is. And then, of course, if you want, because of the Good Friday Agreement, and not to have a return of the troubles and fighting between different factions in Northern Ireland, then you had to have that open border. But how do you then include Northern Ireland, not to be treated differently, but still to have that open border with a part of the European Union? That was the conundrum. And I think in the cold light of day, a new year, a pragmatic attitude now from the DUP, that they're saying, well, we'll try and sell this to our supporters, some of them who are saying they're selling out, but actually this is going to be good. We will have a government again in Northern Ireland. Most people, whatever the politics, will agree on that.
Yellow David, thank you very much.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, turning thoughts into action. Elon Musk says his company has successfully implanted one of its wireless chips into a human.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN. Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and me, Juliet Mann. Our top stories. From Brussels to Bucharest, farmer protests disrupt European cities, angry over what they call excessive red tape.
All this as new GDP figures reveal gloomy economic news across much of the EU.
And red faces at the UK's largest bank. HSBC is fined $73 million for failing to protect customer deposits.
United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is set to meet major aid donors in an effort to restart funding for its Palestinian agency.
More than 20 aid organisations have issued a joint statement calling on countries to resume donations to the UN's agency, which is the largest humanitarian operation inside Gaza. A string of countries cut support to the group in the wake of allegations that some staff were involved in the Hamas attacks in October.
We appeal to donors not to suspend their funding to UNRWA at this critical moment. Cutting off funding will only hurt the people of Gaza, who desperately need support. This discussion is vital, of course, and criminal activity can never go unpunished. But the discussion right now is much of a distraction from what's really going on every day, every hour, every minute in Gaza.
Israeli special forces disguised as Palestinian women and doctors have killed 3 people in a hospital in the West Bank city of Jenin. Surveillance footage appears to show undercover troops pacing through the hospital with assault weapons.
Some appear to have fake beards, others are dressed as Muslim women, and one is in a wheelchair. The Israeli military says 3 alleged terror operatives were killed during the raid. Our correspondent Noor Harazim is in Gaza.
Well, yes, actually, Hamas had a statement hours following this Israeli raid, this Israeli assassination. They said in this statement that the Israeli crimes will not go unanswered. And this is a very strong statement from Hamas, and it reads that things will intensify, actually, not only in the West Bank, but also maybe here in Gaza. And this is not the first Israeli raid on the Palestinian refugee camp of Jenin. This camp, Jenin camp, have been subjected to weekly Israeli raids. However, this is the first time where an undercover troops go inside the hospital. According to leaders in Hamas, the 3 young men that were killed, one of them actually do belong to Hamas. He's a member in Hamas and in Al-Qassam Brigade, which is the militant wing of Hamas. The other young man is from the Jenin battalion, which is a very new resistance group. And the third one is also a resistance fighter, a militant fighter. This all came in the statements from Hamas. However, now Palestinians are waiting to see what will happen in the next few hours. This is something very sensitive to happen at this timing. This is something huge, actually, to happen in Jenin, especially that the police and the resistance fighters inside the refugee camp did not manage to control what was happening inside the hospital.
Well, let's get the view now from Israel. Our correspondent Sarah Coates is in Tel Aviv. Sarah, what more is Israel saying about this raid in Jenin?
Hi, Jamie. Well, look, Israel claims that these 3 Palestinian men were actually terror operatives. They claim that they were planning an imminent terror attack on Israelis similar to that of October 7, saying that one of these men had a gun on him. Now, the Shin Bet, the IDF and also the police, they've released a joint statement saying that the 27-year-old leader of the cell had been in contact with Hamas operatives abroad, adding that he was previously injured while preparing a car bomb and armed other operatives for shooting attacks and was planning this imminent attack that I just spoke about. Now, according to the military, the other 2, they were brothers. One of them had been involved in shooting attacks on Israeli soldiers in the West Bank. The other man belonged to Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But look, there are real fears that this could now see this conflict widen. The West Bank has certainly been an area of great concern for the United States, and it continues to tell Israel to put a lid on it there.
And what's the latest on the negotiations to try and secure the release of hostages?
Well, look, it certainly looked like it may have been moving ahead a little bit just a few hours ago. But look, it seems now that the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, he is pouring cold water on this. He visited a school in the West Bank, a pre-military training school, a little earlier today, saying that the IDF will not leave Gaza and has no intention of releasing thousands of Palestinian prisoners. And this was part of that framework. Palestinian prisoners would be released as Israeli captives would be released. But look, certainly a lot of anger growing here. Let's take a little bit more of a listen to what Netanyahu had to say.
I hear talk about all kinds of hostage deals, so I want to clarify. We will not end this war short of achieving all of its objectives. That means eliminating Hamas, returning all of our hostages and ensuring that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to Israel. We will not withdraw the IDF from the Gaza Strip and we will not release thousands of terrorists. None of this will happen. What is going to happen? An absolute victory.
And look, he is coming under immense pressure. The far-right National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, he is now threatening to bring down the government if a, quote, irresponsible, a reckless deal is made. But look, not just from people here in the political realm, also, of course, from the hostage families. They've held yet another demonstration down on the Kerem Shalom crossing again today, the 7th consecutive day, stopping aid trucks from going into the Strip, saying that nothing should go in until these captives come out. Jamie.
Sarah, thank you for that. Our correspondent Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv.
It's highly addictive and presents a massive health and social problem. Officials from China and the United States are meeting in Beijing to address the crackdown on fentanyl exports.
It's the first meeting of the working group looking to stop the export of fentanyl chemicals since the two countries restarted cooperation on counter-narcotics. CGTN's correspondent Joe Joshin reports.
At the direction of Chinese and U.S. presidents, the two sides have agreed to launch the anti-narcotics working group to resume and navigate their joint fight against opioids, particularly the fentanyl. It begins with their first formal talks on Tuesday in Beijing's Diaoyutai State Guest House. High-level officials from Chinese Ministry of Public Security and U.S. Department of Homeland Security, as well as U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, discussed how to do more to cooperate on tackling fentanyl manufacturing and cutting financing for the trade. The Minister of Chinese Public Security, Wang Xiaohong, said the working group represented an important common understanding reached by the two presidents last November when the counter-narcotics cooperation was among the topics Chinese President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden agreed on during their summit in San Francisco. To deliver on that, the U.S. side has lifted immediately sanctions on relevant Chinese law enforcement institute, and China also issued a public notice warning export orders of 51 precursor chemicals made for the United States and Mexico may face what it called long-arm jurisdiction and even sting operation. One believed that the working level talks now were in-depth and programmatic, hoping future meetings would see two sides accommodating each other's concerns to enhance and expand cooperation to provide more positive energy for stable, sound, and sustainable China-U.S. relations. And the U.S. officials in the past have accused China of being the primary source of the precursor chemicals. Chinese Foreign Ministry said that China, quote, firmly opposes smears and unilateral sanctions on the country under the pretext of the fight against the drugs. China also referred to the U.S. as a black hole and some the source of a problem for global drug control, with 5% of the world's population, about 80% of the global opioid, have been consumed in the United States. Beijing says that the progress now in resuming the cooperation has not come easy and needs to be doubly cherished by both sides, hoping the U.S. will work with China in the same direction and practically cooperate based on mutual respect, equality, and mutual benefit, and that would contribute to the improvement in China-U.S. relations.
How's this for brain power? Tech billionaire Elon Musk says his Neuralink company has successfully implanted a wireless chip into a human. The US Food and Drug Administration gave the company clearance last year to conduct its first human brain trial. The company says the study will assess the functionality of people with quadriplegia or paralysis of limbs to control devices with their thoughts. Well, Anil Seth is Professor of Cognitive and Computational Neuroscience at the University of Sussex. Thanks for coming on Global Business Europe. Now, how would you say that Neuralink works?
Neuralink is an example of this technology. It's actually been around for a while, of brain implantation. And basically, it's kind of simple, really. I mean, not much about the brain is simple, but the technology at heart is. It involves just implanting very, very thin wires into the brain so that they can record activity from inside the brain and also stimulate activity inside the brain. And you connect these wires then to some kind of chip which can decode signals and figure out how to do the stimulation. That's why it's called a brain-computer interface. It really does directly interface the brain with a computer.
Is it safe? I mean, is it something that you'd volunteer to have?
Well, at the moment, it's something that's done for clinical need, so I wouldn't personally volunteer to have something like that done. But it has been around for a while. I mean, I think there's heard this sort of idea that this is the first time this has happened. It's not the first time this has happened. Brain implant technology has been really developed since the mid-20th century, and certainly in the last 30 years, there's been quite a track record. So it's not unsafe. It is invasive, which is to say it does involve sticking something into the brain. So that's always going to carry some risk.
But Elon Musk said that it will enable control of any device through just thinking, and he hopes it's going to help people with disabilities. Do you see this maybe catching on amongst able-bodied people who just want a bit of an edge and are going to use this technology to give them that edge?
I think that's a fascinating question. Of course, it has many ethical implications as well for how we deal with these new technologies in society. There are really two very broad applications. So most of the brain implantation work that's been done so far has been for specific medical conditions. So, for instance, people with paralysis might be able to regain some control of their limbs if their movement intentions, what they want to do, can be read out from their brain to stimulate their muscles. Similarly, people who've maybe lost vision or lost their hearing could regain these senses in some way if the brain can be stimulated by output from a camera, something like that. And there are other applications for Parkinson's disease, for depression, that have been around for quite a long time. But I think one of the reasons why people get excited about Neuralink, and because it's an Elon Musk company, is the possibility of some wider uptake. That once you can record from the brain, maybe decode what people are thinking, what people are feeling, what people are experiencing, well, that really is what we call a dual-use technology. There are many potential benefits from doing that, but there are also many potential worries. Yeah. I don't think we'll see it catching on too widely, mainly because implanting things in the living brain is something that I expect will remain very tightly regulated, and for good reason.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it? Anil Seth, pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the day job is breakdancing, but it's bridge building between France and China that's occupied this 13-time world champion.
The 27th of January marks the 60th anniversary of China and France beginning their diplomatic relationship and starting a historic new chapter. We'll be covering the partnership in detail with week-long special coverage and meeting the bridge builders who have dedicated their lives to strengthening ties between the two countries. China-France 60 years, beginning Saturday, the 27th of January, on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. China and France are celebrating 60 years of diplomatic relations, and we've been taking a closer look at that cooperation, including in the nuclear industry, where collaboration dates back to the 1970s. CGTN's correspondent Cao Chufeng reports.
This is Daya Bay nuclear power plant, and it marked the beginning of nuclear power cooperation between China and France. Today, a quarter of electricity used by Hong Kong is generated by this plant, which has been running safely for 3 decades.
In 1978, former Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping proposed that we should import 2 nuclear power units from France. Eventually, it was decided they would be established in the location we're in now, which is Daya Bay in Shenzhen, Guangdong province.
The construction of the nuclear power station started in 1987 and was completed after 7 years in 1994. French companies helped train Chinese engineers to operate the nuclear power plant, and much of the main technologies were also imported from France.
This is the model of our Daya Bay nuclear power station's reactor. The entire reactor was imported from France. It's the core component of a nuclear power plant. At that time, it was the world's highest safety-rated nuclear reactor. I have full confidence that it can continue to operate for another 30 years or even longer.
China and France have been cooperating with each other on nuclear power for over 4 decades, and China's technologies used to build and operate nuclear power plant have developed tremendously since then. Today, instead of China mostly learning from France, the 2 countries can learn from each other.
We continue benchmarking with French nuclear power plants. We have consistently found there are many aspects in which we still need to learn from them. Of course, peers in France would also come to us for benchmarking. Decades ago, we were students, and peers from France were teachers. Now we are friends.
Since Daya Bay, China and France have also collaborated on several other nuclear power projects, such as Taishan Nuclear Power Plant in Guangdong, which is developed and operated together by the 2 countries. In 2023, the 2 countries also signed new cooperation agreements in nuclear energy during French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Beijing, paving the way for further collaboration. Cao Chufeng, CGTN, Daya Bay Nuclear Station.
To mark the 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations, we've been meeting the people who've helped build bridges between China and France. The head coach of the Chinese national breakdancing team, Munir Biba, spoke to our correspondent Wang Xiwei.
From street corners to the world stage, breaking, better known as breakdance, is now an Olympic sport.
Breaking is a lot more than a sport, it's a culture, it's an art form.
And an activity that is quickly boosting its global footprint.
I never doubt of breaking being a major success. This would change something in the breaking history.
I've come to Paris to meet Munir Biba, who played a key role in breaking's Olympic inclusion.
Hello, Munir. Nice to meet you.
He's also a 13-time breaking world champion and head coach of the Chinese breaking team.
My crewmates always called me like supermarket, in a sense that I was almost able to do everything. Because I love everything in breaking. I love power moves, I love footwork, I love tricks, I love every aspect of
breaking. In 2012, Munir took home the biggest prize of Red Bull BC1, one of the world's most prestigious breaking competitions.
Munir, the world champion of the Red Bull BC1!
But his first encounter with the activity was purely by chance.
I was like 13 years old, I was playing soccer. My plan in my mind was to become a professional soccer player. Then suddenly, autumn 1997, they proposed a hip-hop class. It was not even a breaking class, and I fell in love.
He soon got a first taste of breaking. But the road to being a champion, it's certainly not easy.
I started to practice 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, like every day, all day, since I was like 16, 17 years old. There were plenty of those times when I started to doubt or get tired or because it's a lot of effort. You need a strong vision, you need to stick with it and keep working hard every day.
He also owes his success to the help from people surrounding him.
This is you.
Yeah. The team spirit, the crew spirit for me is really, really important, you know?
Definitely.
Yeah, I think it's the collective that push the individual.
Breaking was born in New York's Bronx district in the 1970s. At that time, street rivals tried to avoid gun violence and solve disputes by breakdance. Half a century later, the dance is embraced in every corner of the world. But the craze entered China relatively late.
China only started 15 years ago and less than 10 years ago to really blow up. So that's still very young.
To help establish and train its national team, China was eager to find someone with plenty of experience.
Why did you decide to accept the offer to become the head coach of the Chinese team?
When China came to me, I know the ambition of China. Chinese ambition, you know, is to be the best, to be number one, to stay number one. So my ambition matched. I know I have great athletes, full potential, with a lack of experience and knowledge. That's what I'm willing to share with them, you know? Like, I want them to start where I start.
From physical training
yes,
to mental preparation, the young Chinese team members have quickly made progress with the guidance from their head coach.
To be the best, you have to be with the best and you have to beat the best.
These young breakers have made a name for themselves on the international stage, including the Hangzhou Asian Games in 2023, when Chinese b-girl Liu Qingyi claimed the historic first ever women's gold medal in breaking.
She's definitely the best in the world with the biggest potential. But like I always say, even the best has to prove it, even the best has to show it. She's only focused on her goal, which is progressing. You know, she understands her potential, but she also understands her weaknesses. And that's what makes the difference between good and great.
And soon, the Chinese team will make their move to Paris, aiming to win the first ever Olympic breaking medals.
So what expectations do you have for the team?
Well, I have for the team the same expectation that I always have for myself. Is to win, is to represent the country, is to be proud of ourselves, is to prepare ourselves the best way possible. We have made tremendous progression and result the last year and a half. So now we can really visualize that competition and say, yes, we can do it.
When China and France are competing in the Paris Olympics, which side would you support?
Well, it's a tough question. So for me, it's not about country, it's about people. I'm the head coach of Team China. I love my team. I love my athletes, you know, my dancers. So I'm here to win with Team China.
As China and France celebrate 60 years of diplomatic ties, Mouni thinks breaking can act as a bridge to connect two cultures.
It's a universal language that requires the same characteristic. You know, being creative, being yourself. I'm learning through you, you're learning through me. You know, that's why this exchange is what makes breaking so unique.
As a breakdancing legend, Mouni is keen to pass on his passion to the Chinese team and present to the world a new fusion of styles and stories.
Breaking is one of the tools that can really help China and France to continue growing together. You know, we have so much to share each other. It's about history. It's about how we see things. Because we are together, we grow.
And there we have to leave you because we're off breakdancing. That's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.